Hi everyone, welcome to Family Matters. We're heading over the ditch. We're heading to Australia. We're heading closer to home. I've been talking to people from Finland to the United Kingdom, getting them mixed up, United Kingdom and the United States. But now we're heading to Australia, and I'm delighted to bring on to the show John Steenhof. He's the principal lawyer at Australia's Human Rights Law Alliance. John, lovely to have you here.
Hello, Simon. Greetings from Canberra. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, look, your work is incredible, and we're going to delve into that more during the podcast for people to understand what you lead there at the Human Rights Law Alliance. I don't know why I get tongue-tied saying it, but you lead
Everyone
some of the
does.
Everyone does. Who came up with the name? As I say, you're the principal lawyer there, and we're going to touch on some of the cases that you've been representing, some successfully, some not. But it's illustrative of, I think, what we're seeing here in New Zealand, and you certainly are having in Australia, which is enormous challenges to some of the most fundamental freedoms that we have, like the freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, freedom of speech. And so I wonder if we might start by just giving a quick introduction to why the organisation exists and why you have a full-time job representing all these people.
Well, Simon, I wish it didn't exist, but it does, because the work we're doing is more and more important in society. We exist because Western societies are increasingly a hostile place for people of faith, and particularly for Christians. Christians are the ones who have deeply influenced the societies that we have today and many of the values that we hold dear, and now they are increasingly under attack in our modern society. So we're a not-for-profit litigation firm that helps protect Christians who face discrimination and attack for their faith. Not just Christians, but anyone who's facing freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom of conscience issues. So we've got a broad clientele who we represent here in Australia, and we want to win cases because cases will shape the law and they will shape public opinion. And what we really need to do is to change the culture in our countries. And a little bit of courage shown by the right people can change culture tremendously. So we're really pleased to be doing the work we've been doing. We've been doing it for 5 years. I've now got a staff of 5. It started with just me and my computer. And we've run a lot of cases through courts. We've had 4 key decisions, 3 of which we've won, and 1 just recently which we had an adverse result in, but which is serving as a great warning for the dangers that we face. But for every one of those cases that gets publicity, we've got tens, 20s, hundreds of people who come to us and who we're able to help, who don't get that publicity, everyday Australians who are facing that hostility.
I went through your website. I mean, a lot of the cases I've been following quietly in the background, as has Bob as well. Obviously, you have the Dr. Gareth Koch. We'll talk about him. You represented Billboard Chris recently, amongst others. Lyle Shelton, he'll be a name familiar to people. But I was struck when I went onto your website just how many more cases there were. And if I might put it this way, there's the high-profile cases, but so many people in a wide variety of roles there in Australia who simply holding a belief, more often than not Christian, but holding a belief that all of a sudden our supposedly pluralistic society has said is no longer tolerable. You're not allowed to have these opinions, or if you have them, you're not allowed to speak them in any shape or form. I mean, it's probably too broad a question, but how on earth have we ended up in this situation? Because we used to pride ourselves in plurality, in having a variety of opinions, but not anymore.
Yeah. Look, that is a very broad question. And I think there's multiple sort of factors that are influencing the culture to where it is today. But one of the big factors we've had is an elite culture that has been obsessed with identitarian rights for over 60 years. And that has been reinforced through politics, through the public service, through our institutions, as they've increasingly been captured by a single ideology. So all of the major human rights instruments that were signed up to post-World War II had a full gamut of rights that are protected, or that they say, ideally, that states should protect for their citizens. We've focused almost exclusively in the West on ones to do with identity, to do with discrimination, to do with equality. And we've done little or nothing around the area of fundamental freedoms. So that there is this natural presumption when you talk to people in society, hey, when I'm talking about human rights, I'm talking about those discrimination, anti-discrimination rights, those identitarian rights. And those rights, when protected alone, just segment us into different groups in society. They destroy social cohesion, and they lead to a society where you have a bunch of people who identify themselves by a bunch of attributes looking to fight for power within that structure. And so we need to get back to a society which has a balance of rights. You're not saying discrimination is great and we should encourage it. We're saying, no, we have fundamental freedoms that need to be given balance. And that's the work that we do in the litigation we run. There's lots of other factors that are influencing our culture, but I think that's a very important one that's just shaped the way people automatically think every time we talk about rights. And that's why when you asked, why are you called the Human Rights Law Alliance? Because we wanted to say, these are actually human rights too. You know, I live in Canberra, which is the public service centre of Australia. It is the jewel of Australia, but not many Australians would agree with me on that. And I coach kids cricket. And so I'm often out amongst other parents. And you come out and you talk to another coach or a parent and they say, what do you do? And I would say, well, I'm a human rights lawyer. They get very excited and they say, oh, are you working for refugees? Are you doing LGBT rainbow work? Are you anti-racist? They go, no, I help Christians who get in trouble for their faith. And you should see the dramatic change in demeanor of some people as they go, oh, I didn't even realize that that's a human right. And that's how far we've come. And I think it's in the air we breathe and it needs to change.
I totally agree with you. It's been a cultural shift. The fact that we are where we are today, both in Australia and New Zealand, as I said at the start, and other parts of the Western world in particular, not exclusively, but particularly, has been something that's been slowly, I was going to say cooking, but probably not the right way to say, but it's just been slowly fermenting away, and it now is feeling it's strong enough to continue to push the narrative. Those who have infiltrated the various institutions, be they political, academic, judicial, wherever, feel strong enough. Because do you have the same, what I would argue is the inherent contradictions, that you've got the very people who are all about identity and talk about diversity and inclusion are at the forefront of stopping, I imagine, a number of your clients, in your case, having their diversity of thought or to be able to express themselves as they want to. I mean, the contradiction is galling to me.
Yeah, we talk all the time about how we've had this inversion of language in the modern technocratic state. So that when someone talks about diversity, what they're talking about is enforced conformity to a certain fashionable political and ideological narrative. No, we've never at any time talked more and more than we have now in society about diversity, about tolerance, about fairness. And never before have we had such a narrow range of views that a person's allowed to have. And so it's always about this inversion of language. I mean, we've never talked more than we do now about psychosocial harms and emotional safety and all of these things. And yet the therapeutic age has given us a generation that's more anxious, is more depressed, has more instability than any generation before. And so when you see these words come up, like liberation or diversity, you know that what they're going to talk about is not liberation but enslavement, is not true diversity, but is enforced conformity.
Do you think most people can see through it, though? I say it somewhat cynically from my end because, maybe it's arrogant for me to suggest, but I look at it and see the opposite. When they say X, they mean Y. They said nice words like diversity, they mean the opposite, as you've explained. But do you think the ordinary, in your case, Australian, can see that and is just going quiet, or have they become so conditioned now that it's lost on them?
I think it's a mix. I think we're seeing a sort of two-tier system where those who are going into the white-collar technocratic administrative roles. Now, 50% of people in Australia get their main income from the government. So people in those kinds of roles, they've had this viewpoint entrenched with them in them through their education and through the workplace that they're in, where there is very little viewpoint diversity at all. I think everyday Australians do see the hypocriticalness of these kinds of movements and words, but a lot of them are a little bit scared to speak. And I think as we see people showing courage and standing up and saying, hang on a minute, here's where we're going wrong, and here's the way this is being used to crush good speech, beautiful speech, true speech, it's going to encourage others to take a stand as well. So, I mean, you see it in the cases that we run. The first case that we ran was for a foster couple in Western Australia, just an everyday blue-collar couple who were local church members, and they saw the great need for people to foster children, and they wanted to foster children between the age of 0 and 5. This is Byron and Kira Hordyke. Their story is great. And when they were interviewed for the foster care, they were asked a question in a worksheet. Your child comes home from school, they've been caught kissing someone of the same sex, what do you do? And they thought, well, it's irrelevant to us, so we're looking to give temporary foster care for the weekend for kids under 5. That's not going to arise. But they said, look, we're Christians. You tell us we need to make sure that placements match between us and other people and the people we're with. And so we would love them as much as we could, but a long-term placement might not work. That's what they're taught to do through the course, but of course, only on issues which are not right in the heart of the ideological fray that we have now. So they were immediately told, you're unsafe as foster carers. And they were told, your application's terminated. Cut a long story short, 5-year battle in the courts. We won. And part of that was getting evidence about how gender and sexual orientation forms in a child, right? Because we're talking about kids under 5, they've got no idea. And there was all of these health professionals who we were looking at to get as experts. We couldn't get anyone who was able to speak on this issue because they were scared of being cancelled, of being disciplined. Now, 5 years later, we're running cases for doctors who are challenging the imposition of gender ideology on them in the public health system, who say we want to do an evidence-based practice, and these forced affirmation procedures are not giving us the clinical freedom and the freedom of conscience. Because of the people who have spoken up in the past, we're seeing more and more speak up now. And I think particularly on the transgender interventions for children, we're going to see real movement in Australia and hopefully in New Zealand, like we've seen all around the world, because children are loved by both left and right, people of the left and right. And so it's not a partisan issue. It's not a conservative issue. It's a parents' issue. And most normal parents recognize this issue once they see all the facts that these things are bad. So that's something where I'm really encouraged that courage brings people to the fore, and they will speak.
Well, was it Billy Graham who said, the strength of one stiffens the spines of many, or something like that? And for me, it's one of the critical elements, and it's my hope when I do interviews like this, John, that actually we encourage other people, Australians, Kiwis, and others who watch it, to go, actually, we need more good people to stand up. Because I think the other side, if I could make it slightly binary, the other side tries to silence anybody's attempt to criticize or critique. I think one of the reasons, and please correct me on this, that your clients get dragged through the mud is, one, obviously to punish them, but also to send a very clear signal to others: don't you dare speak into these issues, don't you challenge us in any way.
Oh, there is a chilling effect every time someone gets dragged through a court, even if they are successful. The process is the punishment for a lot of these matters. But it's important that we do speak up and run these cases. A really good example just recently was the case we ran for Chris Elston, known as Billboard Chris. So your watchers might know who he is. He walks around wearing a billboard in public that says children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And he wants to change the world one conversation at a time, to appeal to people's common sense, their love for their children, to show that what's being hailed as life-saving treatment is actually life-destroying treatment when it comes to putting children on medicines that are going to destroy their fertility, destroy proper function, and which have become quite the obsession of the West. Now, he goes around the world and posts videos to X of conversations that he has. He's been attacked. He's had his arm broken. He's been chased by Antifa. He's a brave guy, and he keeps on walking around with billboards having these conversations and has quite a significant X profile. He saw an article in the Daily Mail, which is a UK publication, about an Australian trans activist named Teddy Cook. Now, Teddy Cook identifies as a man, but is a female, and she has a Facebook profile that had a number of different publicly set photos on there that involved bestiality, involved advocating the use of drugs during sex, bondage and dominance, all sorts of things that were generally unsavory to most people. And an article was written in the Daily Mail about this, saying Teddy Cook has been appointed to a World Health Organization committee that will set trans guidelines. Billboard Chris sees this, thinks this is a bad idea. He writes a post on X. It says, this woman, yes, she's female, is appointed to a WHO committee. And then underneath saying people who belong in psychiatric wards should not be writing guidelines for people who belong in psychiatric wards. Posted the article. The article pops up with pictures on it, one of which was a horrific sort of bestiality picture, but one of Teddy Cook sort of wearing very few clothes. And then he moved on and kept on doing his advocacy. There was a complaint to the eSafety Commissioner in Australia who administers the Online Safety Act. Now, who do you think the Online Safety Act was designed to protect, Simon? I wonder if you can guess.
Well, I assume it was to protect children, or that would have been the excuse put forward, but it's been weaponized much further now.
Yes, but of course, wedged into that act, passed by our Conservative government, the Liberal National Coalition, was a provision that banned adult cyberbullying. And again, this allowed the prevention of, or the ordering platforms to take down posts which constituted cyberbullying. Well, this was used against Chris's one-time post that shared this article that said this person shouldn't be appointed to the committee, and X was forced to geo-block it in Australia. So this shows the international nature of the censorship that we're seeing, and a Canadian censored for sharing a British article in Australia. So originally the matter was taken up by Free Speech Australia. They started a case. It became clear that they needed some serious legal help. Chris, at the time, providentially, in the providence of God, was speaking with the Alliance Defending Freedom. They said, we know a lawyer in Australia who runs these kinds of cases, freedom of speech cases. So they put us on to him. We ran the case for him. X came alongside us, which was good. So it was the cockroach of Billboard Chris and his team against the two big elephants of X and the Australian government solicitor for the eSafety Commissioner. We had a 5-day hearing in March down in Melbourne in the Australian Review Tribunal, and we just got a decision 4 weeks ago, and we were successful. Not only were we successful, our arguments to the judge about what the threshold should be for adult cyberbullying were the ones that were preferred. And see, this is really important that we take these cases because this is a new law. And once we set in place precedents on how that law is to be applied, it's going to apply to people who speak in the future. And one of the great things to come out of this case, there's lots that came out of this, was the fact that the eSafety Commissioner said that misgendering of itself is cyberbullying. So in other words, when you use correct pronouns, sex-based pronouns, the eSafety Commissioner was trying to argue that that of itself is cyber abuse. Obviously, there was lots of different factors that they took into account. Chris Elston is very clear. I use proper pronouns and sex-based pronouns because I care about women and children and they're under attack. And I always do it, and I'll never make concessions on that because it's truth. I believe in truth. I believe in goodness. And so that's why I do it. And that came through in the case. I mean, really, if we didn't have that kind of clarity and conviction and courage, we probably would have had a much different case on our hands. But now that he's done that, it protects all Australians who want to speak truthfully and want to speak confidently into issues of trans ideology and trans activism, particularly within government organisations, because the stuff is all throughout all of our government institutions and organisations.
Oh, it's the same here. It's an obsession. Even though I wanted to be moderate, to say, look, I can understand why some government departments might want to talk on to this. They believe in it. That's fine. But it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's ongoing. But I think, if I might, that illustrates where we started, like the fundamental freedoms of freedom of speech, freedom of association, religion, and conscience. These are so fundamental that we seem to have forgotten how important they are. The ability to just say, look, this is what I believe. I don't expect you to agree with it. If you do, that's brilliant, but you don't have to. But I should be free to speak it. And yet, from your eSafety Commissioner, the politicians who have passed these laws, the academics and others who support it, they're talking compelled speech and they're talking coercion here. I mean, I struggle at times to understand, John, how we've even reached this position where enough of society, including journalists, I might add, think it's okay to coerce people to go against their conscience, to go against what they can empirically see, like Chris can. It boggles my mind.
Well, we have an ever expanding definition of what constitutes harm. Harm used to be physical harm. Then we recognize that there are some things which cause incredible psychological distress. We've medicalized it all and called it psychological harm, psychiatric harm. And now the old epithet that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Oftentimes sticks and stones are no longer violence. They're mostly peaceful protest. And words, that's the real violence, you know. So we've seen that again, that inversion. That's the inversion that's happening all the time. And with the eSafety Commissioner and the Online Safety Act, we're seeing the other key thing that you see, which is the Trojan horse. All of these laws, when I get a first copy of this law that is going to be an imposition on speech, the first thing I say to myself, Simon, is it's never about what they say it's about. So if they're saying, I'm going to pass a law that is going to protect Jews from anti-Semitism and hateful speech, I go to that law and I think it's probably not going to be about what they say it's about, and this law is unlikely to protect a single Jew. And I go in, and sure enough, I see that the categories of speech that are protected are very broad, that are going to be censored, and that it's not just speech against Jews, it's not just speech against religion. They crowbar in a whole bunch of other attributes that are quite contestable, including, say, transgender. So that if you were to say it is wrong to chemically mutilate a child in the name of transgender medicine, then that will come under those hate speech laws. And I'm not a betting man, but I can bet that's how the law is going to be used, not to protect people whose synagogues are being burned, whose houses are being defaced, who are being given all sorts of vile threats in the mail, namely our Jewish communities. But when the law's put out there, everyone thinks this is a fantastic idea because no one wants to see violence against Jews. I don't. No one wants to see hateful speech against Jews. I don't. But I think what's worse than hateful speech is governments deciding what constitutes hate speech or not.
It's something I fought against when I was in Parliament, often and frequently from both sides of the House. It was particularly from the left, but I would want to be clear that even colleagues of mine on the right were sort of, oh, what's really the big deal? Of course, we just want to be nice to people. But it's exactly what you're saying. If you lift up the hood from what they're presenting, this ever-growing desire to, again, limit what you can think. Ironically, in an inversion sense, in order to
Yeah.
protect free speech, we've got to stop you from speaking. It's like, what?
Well, Ronald Reagan said that the 9 most chilling words in the English language are, "I am from the government and I'm here to help." I think in the 21st century, the 11 most chilling words you hear from government is, "I am from the government and I'm here to keep you safe." The word safe is used to mask what is just a government intrusion into spheres that it has no business policing, and does a poor job of policing through legislation and then through police and institutional coercion. And I think people are starting to realize that. But I think the problem is that when you say freedom of speech is really important, it's such an abstract concept that people can kind of give it an intellectual assent, but it doesn't have the emotional push of the stories and the scare tactics that are used to try to push through these speech policing laws. So we need to be more clear about, this law says it's going to stop hate, but what's going to happen is that parents are going to be put in jail for trying to protect their kids from activists. We're going to see people in public spaces being arrested, people being confronted in their own homes for thought crime, which is happening in the UK, right? People make posts on the internet and the police are at their door saying, we want to talk to you about your thoughts. That's what one ex-police officer was told in the UK. So we can see what's going to happen with these laws, and we should be telling those stories, I think.
I think it was the UK. Was it a woman who... So I'd make a terrible lawyer, John. I'm not so precise or a good enough memory, but she was arrested for praying, just happened to be standing with her thoughts, and
Yes.
the police were asking, what were you praying? I mean, the answer really is bugger off. But I'm just amazed that, again, we're in that space. My suspicion, it's been the slow boil, and not enough
Yes.
people, again, lifting the hood. We've got the same dynamics here. We don't have the same quite level of violence yet against our Jewish Israeli community. There's certainly problems, but there is calls for, yes, we need to address anti-Semitism. And and by the way, if we're doing that, we need to address Islamophobia, conflating two very different dynamics. And then, of course, actually, other minority communities who have been historically persecuted. And I sit there going, would anyone like to define any of these words for a start, so we know, where we're going? But it just slowly encroaches, and I wonder, and this is probably more of a philosophical than a legal question, when we as societies, be it Australia or New Zealand, step away from an agreed moral foundation, we have to replace it. And so now we see a myriad of laws and regulations. Here in New Zealand, we are now debating, get this, whether or not your child should be allowed to go and collect eggs from the chickens or water the garden, because it could be a health and safety issue. I am not joking. Welcome to modern New Zealand. I know it's not freedom of conscience issues, but we have so many laws and regulations. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's a overrealization of the power of legislation. Legislation is good in certain narrow circumstances, but it can't patrol and police the family sphere, the religious sphere, a lot of the social interaction spheres. The human rights instruments that were originally passed were not to allow citizens to weaponize laws against citizens. They were to say, you must undertake these human rights covenants as a state so that you do not breach your obligations to your citizens to give them these freedoms of speech, freedoms of thought, freedoms from discrimination. It wasn't mainly to allow people to fight against each other in courts, which we're seeing, because post-World War II, the West still recognized that a big state and a powerful state is a bad state. I mean, it was right in the throes of a lot of totalitarian regimes in communist countries and the spread of communism. So, yeah, these are questions way beyond my remit as a lawyer, Simon, but they're very interesting, and you've got to know where we've come from, but if you want to know where we are now and where we can go, and where we should go. So,
Well, absolutely. And look, it's a philosophical point, but our rights are inalienable to us as individuals. They're not given to us by the state. But certainly here in New Zealand, that's inverted too. I think this is going to be the word of the podcast, is inversion. But now there is a sense, no, that the state will give you or take them away. Particularly if you've been a naughty boy or a naughty girl, will take those rights away. And I don't know, certainly when I look across the ditch, you mentioned your eSafety commissioner. I don't know what the other titles are. I know there's some group in Tasmania that was chasing up one of your senators there. Claire Chandler was having a crack at the Archbishop of Tasmania because he dared to say that marriage is between a man and a woman. There seems to be all these bureaucrats and pseudo-judicial bodies, codes of conduct. I mean, is this becoming a major problem across wider Australia?
Yeah, I think in the West, as a society becomes more and more complex, you need more and more administrators to operate that, and you need, as technologies evolve, you need different laws that extend to different spheres. But I think the problem is that we've got the administrative class has been captured by a certain ideology, and it's rather utopian, thinking that government can solve all problems. Like, we need that administration. We need to have good public servants, but they need to know where the bounds of their authority are. And at the moment, we're just seeing this encroachment and creeping of vague codes of conduct, vague standards that apply. I mean, the classic case is one that we just got a decision in last week, Thursday, just a week ago, for a doctor in Victoria who was a GP for 13 years, Australian-born Chinese, great doctor, never had any complaints against him by any of his patients, but he loved to post it on the internet. And oftentimes he would post satire and memes, and he would talk about all of the conservative and Christian issues. So abortion, conversion therapy laws. He posted about the lockdowns and public health orders, and about the issues of conscience for vaccines. And he was disciplined by the medical board. They suspended him without investigation on the basis that it was in the public interest, immediately after they had notified him that they were investigating him. And he waited 5 years for trial until last year. A year later now, we've got a decision, and he's been found guilty of professional misconduct. And that was on the basis of a forensic audit they did, engaged a massive, one of these big auditing firms to go through all of his social media, all of his internet presence, in fact, not just social media, to find anything he'd ever posted in a 12-year period, picked 85 posts out of those, and then put together sort of a wish list of allegations against him. And now he said, look, I've talked about abortion because I think it's murder as murder, and I've called those who do it serial contract killers. And he's used blunt language, which he accepted. I shouldn't really do that about doctors. It's unprofessional. And he made those concessions. But what he did not concede was that the medical board has significant enough proximity to his medical practice to be able to sit there and impose on the posts that he's making on Facebook in his own personal capacity, not as a doctor. So it's one of those cases where we were very hopeful that the court would make a clear boundary between what is relevant to medical practice and to someone's holding a medical license, and what is well within their rights to speak about political issues. I mean, this is Dr. Jareth Cock, and he was posting, say, links to Babylon Bee articles, which are satire articles, where he said Chinese are going to invade the West by shouting pronouns, or posts that shared Katie Faust saying children need a mother and a father. And so we need to ensure that we have families and encourage families that have mothers and fathers. And all these things were seen as derogatory towards LGBTQI people, just for sharing those kinds of things. And it's many of those things that are reinforcing that people do not have their own rights to speak in the digital public square anymore. And really the public square is increasingly digital. We're not going out and communing in an actual public square. So it's important that people have the rights to speak on these issues. Concerningly, a lot of the posts he made were political posts about the extent and reach of the lockdowns. in Victoria, of which Victoria had the worst ones in the world. And those were deemed to have been denigrating to people who wanted to obey public health orders. So a disappointing decision, but one that really shows the dangers that we're facing if we allow this administrative creep, where organizations like the medical board, who should totally be disciplining doctors who engage in malpractice, who engage in shoddy surgeries, and who engage in, say, sexual conduct with their patients, right? But extending it beyond that for them to then police the ideology and politics of doctors is just not a good idea, and it's bad for society. It's not just that a bunch of guys with some unpopular ideas who express them rudely are going to get in trouble. It's that all Australians are going to be policed, all Australian doctors, and they're not going to want to speak up against the orthodoxy when the orthodoxy is wrong.
Well, it's why I often talk about this as a new religion. It's highly dogmatic, and so particularly if it's around these LGBTIQ plus rights, or they want to call it gender-affirming care, pro-death concepts like abortion, euthanasia, drug use, the way it's been approached is sort of like middle-aged religion, as in of the Middle Ages, that you will come along with our dogma, and if you don't, we'll burn you alive. And now they do it via doxine, or as in Dr. Cox's case, to destroy his career. It's mind-boggling, but it's one of the reasons amongst many to have you on, because people just need to know that these aren't just academic concerns or isolated incidents. There's a growing trend now where I would argue the weaker one side's argument is, the more aggressive, bullying, and trying to, as they have done, take these avenues to silence people. Because amongst other things, we used to have a distinction between the private and the public. Whereas now, it sounds like your medical council and various corporates and government bodies effectively police their staff or their employees in their private time. And say, no, you're not allowed to have that thought. You can dress up in a skirt and go to a drag time story or attend an Antifa protest. But yeah, say you're pro-life, we're going to come after you.
Yeah, and we've seen countless examples of this, Simon. And the underlying thing is that bad ideas need to be propped up, right? If they're bad ideas, then you need to surround them with a bunch of laws that protect them from being talked about or criticized. Otherwise, they collapse. So that's where a lot of this is coming from. But we've acted for academics in universities whose private social media posts and podcast appearances have caused students to make complaints, which faculties readily accept, saying that there's not enough safety in the class. I don't feel safe in the classroom with someone who doesn't totally affirm trans. You cannot be a social worker and be involved in social work academia unless you are absolutely pro-trans. I used to think that the Christians were the canaries in the coal mine who were facing the most opposition and hate, but I've increasingly seen this new species of gender-critical feminists, people like J.K. Rowling. She's a real famous example, but we've got heaps of them here in Australia who just face so much vitriol and hatred, and who it's at a level that's beyond, I think, what even Christians are facing. And one of the cases that's going to be heard next week is the appeal from Giggle and Tickle. I don't know if New Zealanders have been following this. It's like one of those mock case names that they put on a law problem, where they just name it with grumpy versus happy. This is Giggle and Tickle. You'll know about this, but Giggle was an app for girls. Roxanne Tickle is a trans-identifying man who says, well, I'm a woman, and I've had my birth certificate changed, so I should be able to join your app. And was kicked off by Sal Grover. She is the person who set up this app, in part because she'd been subject to sexual assault by men and wanted a safe space for women. Well, Roxanne Tickle didn't like this, took a discrimination complaint. Of course, our human rights apparatus, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, came in behind the transgender applicant rather than the female defendant, and said, yes, this is discrimination. We got an original case out of the court that said that in Australia, sex is legally changeable, that this is, Roxanne Tickle is a woman, so you cannot exclude her from this woman's platform. So that's going to appeal. We're hopeful that it's successful, but it's just shouldn't have to go for a 5-year journey through the courts on this. But look, Sal Grover's case is strong because she's standing up for truth, for reason, for logic, for biology, for facts. And so it doesn't matter what legal fictions you put in the law, in the mistaken thought that you're protecting people from vilification and from being discriminated against, the truth will come out, I think, and I'm very hopeful of that in
No,
that case.
I would share it. We've had Sel on the show before, and I've talked to her a few times. I admire her courage, and I mean, amongst many messages, what she's going through, and you see it with J.K. Rowling, Kerry Smith, another case. Kerry's actually coming over to our forum soon, but it's how men who think they're women continue the bullying and harassment. There's so much talk, John, of toxic masculinity in the world, and yet in this trans agenda, if I could phrase it that way, that the harassment of biological women, which is now being accepted in society in a way that I just find really weird. Growing up in the 70s, 80s and beyond with, a wave of feminism there as women pushed for their rights, and now somehow we've popped out the other side that we're back to men harassing women as long as they wear a dress, and then it's okay. It's just bizarre. But then it also illustrates, as far as I understand, your sex discrimination law. And the Prime Minister's name slips my mind, but she's a she, and I can see her
Julia
face.
Gillard.
That's
Julia
the
Gillard.
one.
Yeah. I like Julia Gillard. She's one of the rare Prime Ministers who, once she was finished being Prime Minister, didn't get up like a miserable ghost and complain all the time about what was going on in the country. So she had dignity and grace there, even though she made a big mistake in the way that she put changes through to the Sex Discrimination Act. So it destroyed the very concept that it was designed to protect, namely sex as a genuine category of being.
Yeah, well, one of my first chats with Sel was around that, because I was asking her, look, how do you feel about the case? And she said, look, it's not breaking confidences because she's talked about this a lot, but it was like, hey, when they changed the law and to put gender in the Sex Discrimination Act, the judges are going to have to, certainly the case that she lost just has to follow that. But, there's something illustrative of what you touched on earlier. When politicians in particular change laws, insert particular words, we need to interrogate them, ask what they mean. Because it's just, again, for me, certainly here in New Zealand, you sort of feel the walls closing in. Certainly more and more people being hauled, again, into these sort of pseudo-judicial bodies, certainly being embarrassed through our media. I don't know how balanced yours is, but here in New Zealand, it's all pretty much in one direction. You will be either censored or pilloried. But we're also seeing more and more laws. We've got conversion therapy laws now. As I say, we push for hate speech laws continues. We have online safety laws. They call it the Harmful Digital Communication Act. And all the time, it's one-sided. Because you can, as we have here in New Zealand, weekly protests supporting Hamas. I know it's a different topic, but they're out there supporting Hamas. Terrible things have been said. People harassed. Nothing to see here, according to the police and all our commissioners. But yeah, stand outside, as one guy did with a billboard about abortion. He got arrested. And it's just like, what the? Just maddening.
Yeah, the two-tier nature of it, which they're really starting to pick up on in the UK, even publicly. They're calling Keir Starmer two-tier Keir because of the differential treatment depending on what ideological cause you're supporting. And the police will definitely treat you differently. And it is a problem with the politicisation of our institutions. We used to have a public service that was dispassionate, robust, and gave frank advice. Now we've seen that politicised. We used to have a police force that was generally operating according to principles of justice that had no political sort of bias to them. And increasingly now we're seeing them being used as tools to enforce these political ideas. I mean, the classic was when Billboard Chris came to Australia. He went to Brisbane and appeared in a public square with his billboard. He was given a fine for obstructing the public when he just stood waiting for people to come talk to him. Now, we challenged that and we got him off that fine, but it was instructive that within half an hour of him being there, he was surrounded by 9 cops, and he had an officious Brisbane City Council officer there telling him that he was breaking the law. I think a couple of weeks before, there was a pro-Palestine protest where people lay down and stopped anyone from moving through this mall, this public mall, and not one of those people was given any sort of fine for obstruction. That if there's anything that shows that this is two-tier, it's that. And
we've had our examples too. We had one of my friends, her name's Lucy, she's a lawyer, actually stood on our main street of Auckland with a sign, something like "Silence is complicity" or something pretty simple, shall I say. She was arrested by the police because of the thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters going by, who she was just quietly, as they're on the sidewalk, holding her billboard. She was arrested on the basis that police said, well, these guys here might attack you. And most of us are sitting here going, aren't the police meant to stop people doing the attacking, not arrest the person who might be attacked? And the same when a group of those gender-critical feminists gathered in a park called Albert Park. People following the podcast will know where I mean. They were assailed by trans activists, all again talking about diversity, inclusion, and safety. They started beating up the women, and the police stood back because they went, well, you chose to be here. Highly compromised our police, and it's actually got lasting repercussions now. People don't trust them. They're beginning to take political sides in a number of these contentious issues.
Yeah, well, once you politicize your institutions, then you get that lack of trust. You get a breakdown of social cohesion, and then you get you can get people complaining. Well, there's all these people believing in conspiracy theories. It's because of that breakdown of trust. Like, it's not people's fault; it's the fault of our institutions, according to me, anyway.
No, I agree. I agree.
And then what happens is they say, well, with all these conspiracy theories, we need some more laws to shut these down online. And so you just get this this reinforcing loop of more imposition on people, and then more stimulus response. It can be disheartening, but it's not disheartening because we know that we have a rich, fertile, strong tradition which our laws and our systems have been drawn from, and particularly when it comes to our courts. They are founded on principles of justice, most of which find their genesis within Rome, Greece, and Christianity and its strong, strong influence, that really allow you to test and speak and weigh up evidence and the truth. And the judiciary, I'd argue, is far more resistant to politicization than the other governing institutions like the legislature and the executive. So this is why we think a lot of the litigation that we're running is going to be successful and has been successful. I mean, we won a case for Lyle Shelton, who was dragged through a court for saying that drag queens are bad role models for children. So we're optimistic. We've got a great foundation in the West for the way that we're governed. Rights don't appear out of nowhere. They appear over the hard work of people over millennia, and you can't destroy them overnight, even though some of our institutions are doing a real fine job of trying to do that. So oftentimes when I tell the stories, and I haven't told many stories, but there's lots, people are like at the end, they're like, oh, this is terrible. The world's falling apart. I'm like, the world is not falling apart, No. There are things we can do. We still have a lot of freedoms, and we got to use them. We got to be courageous and bold. And it's the small little things that people do and the little pushbacks that you get. We had one small one, which was a stand at a Melbourne Royal show, which had been giving away Bibles for about 113 years. And the organisers of the Melbourne Royal show said, no more. We're no longer giving stalls at this show to religious causes. Now, that small organisation could have just said, okay, but they didn't. They did a public petition, which was very effective. And then they put in a letter saying this is discrimination, citing the law, getting on the front foot with it. And then there was a back down, there was a climb back. And so there's a little part of the public square that's still open for people of faith. And it's the little stories that are happening day by day, some of that we'll never hear about, that are encouraging and are going to mean that the world is a better place than it otherwise might be. And our society is still a place that has freedoms. That's what I think.
Well, it's one of the reasons amongst many why I'm delighted you agreed to come on, because actually you are leading so many important fights. Some are very well known. You mentioned Billboard Chris and, of course, Dr. Jareth, amongst others. But there's a myriad. As I said to you before we came on, I was amazed of how many cases are on your website. People in situations that certainly here in New Zealand no one would have ever heard about. But you're part of that courageous pushing back. And the other thing we'd mentioned before coming on is that place of hope. And it's certainly for me something that's really, really important, comes from a faith perspective, that we do have hope and we're just called to contribute as we can. And so I just hope people from this chat with you, John, and hearing what you've got to say and what you've been doing, do find that courage to say, no, this isn't right. And actually the law, and I love what you said, it's a rich tradition. It didn't just pop up yesterday. It's well grounded. We can use it to protect those very fundamental rights that protect our way of life, which we've come to love.
Yeah, and the great thing is, I'm in Australia. What do you do in New Zealand? Great friend of mine, Alex Penk, runs an organisation called Ethos. They do very similar things to what we do. Alex is an exceptional guy. He's running an incredible ministry at incredible personal sacrifice. And because he believes that we need to be involved in pushing back at this, and that's good for all New Zealanders, it's good for all Australians that we're doing it here. It's the social good that we're pursuing there. So New Zealanders don't have to think, I wish I was in Australia. There's people in New Zealand doing it. So, and I wanted to give that plug because he's doing good work. And as is Bob in the advocacy space, right? And all of you, all of those at Family First, fantastic work. I don't think people understand just how much Bob does. You probably take it for granted, to be honest. There's nothing like it.
He's a dynamo.
So much.
He's a dynamo.
I know. So, yeah.
This is now the Bob appreciation segment of the podcast. No, he's a top bloke.
It makes up for the friendly trans-Tasman banter that we always engage in person. So I want to speak well of him behind his back, but it'll be back to normal engagement and rivalry when we see each other again.
Which won't surprise me. People at our forum last year were quite taken aback. We had Lyle Shelton as the guest, and obviously, probably like you and Bob, the way you'll talk, well, he just started going after Lyle and Australians, and you could see some of the audience a bit shocked. It was all being done in great humour. Lyle understood it and gave back as good as he could get. But you could see, as I say, some people going, oh gosh, what's happening here? But can I quickly add too, thank you for mentioning Alex. Those who follow the podcast should know his name. We had him on a few months ago talking about Ethos. But I think, John, what you're highlighting that you're leading courageously in Australia is available here. Ethos is obviously starting out its journey, but that's an encouragement to our viewers and listeners. You know, if you are facing the sort of discriminations that John's been talking about, I mean, get in touch, look up Alex and Ethos Alliance, or get hold of me or Bob. We'll handshake you across and help. But John, I'm conscious I've taken an enormous amount of your time, but I'm just so delighted you agreed to chat and just talk us through some of those cases. I think it's quite inspiring what you're doing. And again, that advocacy and courage, as we said earlier on, stiffens the spines of many.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Simon. It's a privilege to talk to you and to see the work you guys are doing over across the other side of the Tasman, over there in East Australia. It's fantastic.
Well, it still is in your constitution that we can become a state of Australia, but I think it's bad news. A bit like Canada being taken over by the US. It ain't going to happen. John, a pleasure to chat.
Thanks, Simon.